There he comes, Senator Warnock. Thank you so much for being able to join us at Georgia Equality today. We are so excited to have you. We're so excited that you made history. A lot of folks in Georgia thought that it was just an absolutely wonderful day when it was announced that you were going to be our next U.S. Senator. So thank you so much and welcome.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Always good to see you, brother.
Always good to see you as well. Senator Warnock. And I actually am lucky enough to live right around the corner from Senator Warnock. So I will say that I know for a fact that he does like dogs. In fact, when I was walking my own dog a couple of weeks ago, we were lucky enough to stop him as he was heading out to do the people's business. And he stopped and asked about the dog. So thank you for that, Senator. Since our time is short, I want to just go right into asking some questions of you that I think are going to be important for folks to hear around the state of Georgia. And I want to start off with something that's actually very personal to me. So even though I've known you, worked with you on a number of issues for the better part of a decade or more, it was 5 years ago that we actually had one of the worst and most tragic instance of violence against the LGBT community, and that was the massacre at Pulse nightclub. And that happened just a few days before you were leading a program at Ebenezer Baptist Church to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church. And so it was so important for those of us in the LGBT community that you, before you were a senator, opened up the doors at Ebenezer, changed your program to welcome in members of the LGBT community, welcome in members of the LGBT clergy. I would like to just start off by asking you, what was so important about that night, and why did you make this commitment to change an already important event to be more inclusive?
Well, thank you. I really didn't feel then, and I don't feel now like I did anything special or extraordinary. For me, it really was a no-brainer. I did not invite members of the LGBTQ plus community into my community. They are my community. They're in my church. And so an attack on the Pulse nightclub, not unlike an attack on Mother Emanuel AME Church, was an attack on all of us, an attack on people I love, whose faith I know, and whose patriotism and commitment to what Dr. King called the beloved community is unassailable. And Dr. King taught us that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I believe that. And I believe that there's no such thing as equal rights for some. And so it was important in that moment, especially for those of us who are Christians, who are people of faith, to show up and be present. Not that we could offer any easy answers. You know, I'm a pastor, and so I know from experience, from walking with people through their grief, even just, you know, not just tragic grief, but the normal cycle of life, people pass away. You don't have answers in those moments. You don't have an easy salve that just causes the pain to vanish. And you're better served not to say too much, I think, because no words can adequately capture that kind of grief, that kind of hole in your heart. We're all buoyed up by our faith and the things that strengthen us in that moment, but words are insufficient. What's really important is what I call the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence. The ministry of presence is his own power. Showing up for one another, even when we don't have the answer, is his own power. And so all I was trying to do, Jeff, was to show up. And I think it's so important that we do that again and again. Show up.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. I really do appreciate that. And again, I appreciate your long commitment to social justice and your long commitment to inclusion of the LGBT community. I'd like to now turn it over to our board secretary, Justine Ingram, and her first question. Thanks.
Hi, Senator Warnock. My name is Justine Ingram. I'm the board secretary for Georgia Equality, as well as a community advocate and leader for the transgender community here in the South. So 2021 is on pace to be the deadliest year yet for transgender and gender nonconforming people in the US, with an estimated 28 victims already. And these numbers do include two of our own here in Atlanta, Bianca Muffin Banks and Sophia Vasquez. So my question to you, Senator Warnock, as a Black trans woman, I'd like to know what you and your colleagues are doing to advance policy change to support the trans and gender nonconforming communities.
Well, first of all, let me just say my heart goes out to the families of Bianca and Sophia. You know, that's unspeakable pain and loss, and it's a loss for all of us, not just for those families. And so, you know, I mean it when I say I'm committed to equality. And, you know, we talk about rights, civil rights, human rights, but the most fundamental right is just the ability to stay alive. And you shouldn't have to lose your life because of your life, because of who you are. That is an assault on one's humanity that's unspeakable. So the question is, how do we translate that into legislative commitment? That's something I think we have to keep working on. But I was proud to be a co-sponsor of the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, which was included in the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, focused on this very issue. And we'll have to continue to do that. And I'll continue to look to members of the LGBTQ plus community for insight about how to make those communities safer. In addition to that, you know, I think, you know, we're gonna have to find ways to address violence in general. Because while that is a particular kind of violence, I think that violence also is its own power. Violence begets violence and creates the conditions for that to continue. And so we need to have some honest conversation. And, you know, unfortunately, the whole violence and people's preoccupation with sex and sexual identity and other people's gender identity, all of that is there's a long history to that, even where race is concerned. You know, I think we get uncomfortable in America. You can't really talk about racism in America without talking about the whole component around sex and sexuality and people's preoccupations with other people and their imagination and all of that. And that takes on a tragic dimension where this issue is concerned. And so I think we need a commitment at the federal level to collect the data. And I hope you don't misunderstand me, because when you're in pain, last thing you want to hear from folks in government is we're going to study the issue. I don't mean in the sense of not doing anything, but sometimes there's resistance to collecting the data because people don't want to acknowledge the problem. So we need to make sure that we collect the data, that we understand this more and more, and that we do all we can to stop it from happening. And then beyond that very tragic experience, you know, that extreme form of violence, I think, has to be viewed in a larger sense of the word. I think that there is a kind of violence that has to do with just the deprivation of the human spirit. I think poverty is its own violence, and I think lack of access is violence, which is why I'm a proud co-sponsor of the Equality Act. Because when non-gender conforming people, other members of your community, the LGBTQ plus community, are locked out, it reinforces this notion that somehow you're something other than human. And if you can ever render people something as something other than human, you can do almost anything to them. And it'll be justified in law and sometimes sacralized, right, by religion and reinforced by the culture. And so part of the hard work we have to do against this kind of violence, other than the obvious things, because we've seen the violence itself or, you know, snapping it out, is creating a culture that is more inclusive, that affirms the humanity of all people under God.
Thank you, Senator Warnock.
Good morning, Senator. It's an honor to be with you today. My name is Will Ramirez. I am a veteran and former educator. I'm also an End-in-D Epidemic Fellow at Georgia Equality, where I focus mainly on housing and housing policy issues related to people living with HIV. So the previous administration advanced a plan to end the HIV epidemic by 2030. However, in Georgia, the shortage of doctors, the lack of Medicaid expansion, and rural hospital closures are barriers to achieving this goal, especially in Black, Latinx, and LGBTQ communities. What are your plans to support legislation that protects communities of people living with HIV and who are more vulnerable to HIV acquisition, as well as to ensure adequate funding for HIV treatment and prevention?
Well, if I will, and thank you for the question. Let me begin by saying that this is an issue, HIV/AIDS, and our response to this. This is an issue I have worked on literally for decades. I've been in this space working on HIV/AIDS primarily as a faith leader. You know, especially in the early days, I was very intentional about doing everything we could to wage war against what I call the unholy trinity of silence, stigma, and shame. That unholy trinity of silence, stigma, and shame, I think is as deadly as the virus itself. Is what gets in the way of serious engagement. And so as a clergy person, I tried to embody and put my body on the line and in the struggle in ways, again, that I don't see as heroic or extraordinary, but if they can help, that's what I'm here to try to do. So I've taken an HIV/AIDS test in my pulpit as part of our Sunday morning worship on more than one occasion to say to others that we ought to view this as a health problem on a continuum with everything else you check, your blood pressure, you get your mammogram, you get your prostate checked out. I've said to people in church, you know, get your HIV test, know your status. And I've encouraged the elders and people that other folk look up to, clergy, to get tested as a way of undermining the stigma. So that's the work, some of the work that I've done leading up to my work here in the Senate. When I was a pastor in Baltimore, my church was located in a zip code where the HIV/AIDS rates of infection rivaled some sub-Saharan African nations. And so I kicked off my investiture as the new pastor of that church back in 2001. I kicked off my investiture as the new pastor with a symposium on HIV/AIDS and then a march through the city talking about the church needs to respond to this issue. So I've been working on this issue for decades. And for me, it's a healthcare issue among other issues. I care a lot about healthcare, which is why I continue to fight for Medicaid expansion in Georgia. Georgia is one of only 12 states now that still has its, you know, it's still dug in. The state legislature refusing to give ordinary Georgians access to their own money. I think it's important that we understand that that's what this is. They're refusing to give you access to your own money. You pay federal taxes. And so when we refuse to expand Medicaid, you don't get a tax refund, you just subsidize healthcare in other states. And so there are many dimensions to this problem, but Medicaid expansion would go a long way to helping us to get people to the care that they need in general, particularly the working poor, the hundreds of thousands of Georgians, maybe as many as 500,000 who are in what's called the Medicaid gap. And so that's why when we passed the American Rescue Plan, I put in a provision to make it even more attractive than it already is for Georgia to finally do the right thing, get over the politics and expand Medicaid. In the meantime, I don't know if they're going to respond to those incentives or not. Politicians too often are focused on the politics rather than the people. So the other thing I'm working on is another provision in an upcoming bill that will hopefully be a workaround that'll give people in Georgia direct access through a Medicaid system that we'll set up at the federal level, and people in Georgia can access it. So that's some of the work that I'm doing on this front. And look, I think, one of the things that George W. Bush perhaps got right during his tenure was PEPFAR. It's a massive response to this issue in Africa. And unfortunately, I think because of the success of the antiviral treatments, and we don't see AIDS, right? We don't see it the way we used to see it in the 80s and the 90s. I think people have been lulled into sleep, but we know that the reality is something other than that. I'm aware of that, especially in places like Atlanta and in Georgia. So, we may need to give some thought to what does a PEPFAR look like in the United States.
Thank you, Senator, for your continued effort in this fight.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Senator. My name is Alexa Bryant, and I am the Development and Communications Coordinator here at Georgia Equality. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about voting rights and access. Leading up to the January runoff, Georgia Equality was able to raise and spend almost $1 million. It allowed us to contact 800,000 voters. But if the current efforts to stifle access to the ballot are successful, it will make it extremely difficult for us to be able to contact and encourage that many pro-equality voters. We know that S1 failed this week. And so I just wanted to know, what now? We're 16 months out from the next congressional election. What do we do? What's happening now?
Well, thank you so very much. And the spirit of what you're saying, I feel it. And, what you're saying is correct, but let me nuance it just a little bit, because I think it's an important nuance. Okay. That one we need to amplify. Actually, S1 did not fail this week. What failed this week was our ability to proceed to have debate on S1. That's what failed. Mm-hmm. That's the bill itself wasn't on the floor. We were just trying to get permission, which would require 60 votes, to proceed. Yeah. To have the debate. The Republicans could have introduced whatever amendments they wanted to introduce and say, well, these parts of the bill are fine, but we don't like this, and here's why. And they could have introduced any number of amendments, and we would have had to respond and be on record. They didn't even want to have a conversation in front of the American people about voting rights 6 months after there was an attack on the Capitol, claims of voter fraud, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Audits being run in Arizona and tragically, perhaps in a state near you soon, in Georgia. So here's the thing, and this is the point I made yesterday in my speech. Or on Tuesday, was that there's agreement on the right and the left, albeit for very different reasons. There's agreement that the democracy is in peril. Very different arguments, But you know, in politics, we got to find the places where we agree. Well, we all agree there's a problem for very different reasons.
Yeah.
But everybody's saying, you know, it's a problem. So how do you say that? And they can't act like they don't think it's a problem because they've introduced nearly 400 voter suppression bills
I know.
in 48 states. You can't do that and at the same time say, actually, we think things are fine. So why not leave it the status quo? You can't have it both ways. So while they're doing that, they don't even want to have a debate because they know they're lying. They know that this is all about voter suppression. But let's have the argument. Let's have it in front of the American people.
Right.
So that's what failed the other day. And I think honestly, it leaves, Alexa, a question for all of us. You know, I'll have to say you're gonna be mad because I'm sure you get this all the time. I'm loving it that Alexa is asking me a question.
It is the joke that never dies.
I know, this is fantastic. Though.
Years.
I know, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's a question for all of us, particularly my caucus. The question for us now is going to be, well, what are we going to do now? And the thing is, we have the slimmest of majorities, but we do have the majority. So the thing that prevented us from having the debate yesterday was not a law, it was just a Senate rule. And Senate rules can be changed by the majority. That's us, if we decide to change it.
Say it one more time.
Senate rules can be changed by the majority, and that's us.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think that no Senate rule is more important than people's constitutional rights. You know, even if you had to filibuster on this thing or that thing or the other thing, I don't think that voting rights is one other issue alongside other issues. Voting rights for me is the whole thing. Hear me out, because I know you say, well, what about that issue? What about that issue? What about, you know, I get it. Climate change is existential. So how are you going to say voting rights is the whole thing? Because voting is about the democracy itself. It is the framework. We argue about the future, whether it's climate change or equality or healthcare or foreign policy or immigration policy, taxes. We talk about all of those things within the framework of certain democratic presuppositions.
Absolutely.
And if that is undermined, that's the whole house.
Absolutely.
And so that can't be, so if you're gonna have a carve out for anything, and we're the ones who made a carve out for the courts a few years ago, to have a carve out for anything, shouldn't it be for voting rights, the ability of the people and their voices to be heard in their own house. So that's where I am. You know, there are ways to do this. You know, you could get rid of the filibuster. You could leave the filibuster in place and just say, you know what, we're not going to submit constitutional rights to that. You could make people actually do a real filibuster, like they did in the old days, where you actually had to hold the floor and actually talk. Nowadays, we just declare it's a filibuster and go down the street and have a latte. You know, the filibuster is not even a real filibuster. So I think it's on us to address that. Meanwhile, we're waiting on John Lewis. That bill is still in the House, on the House side. It will get here eventually. But let me just quickly say in my long-winded answer that I remain committed to voting rights. I'm not about to give up on this. I've heard the leader, Chuck Schumer, say the same thing. For the 50 members of our caucus, we got to find a way forward. Now, in the meantime, here's what I need you to do. I need you to bring the same energy and commitment that you did the last time to voting. Because voter suppression, the ultimate goal of voter suppression is to so demoralize the electorate or parts of the electorate that you don't even bother to try. And if you let them do that, they will have succeeded. They don't succeed simply by stopping us from having a debate yesterday. if they can demoralize parts of the electorate so that you don't bother to try and say it's too hard, they will have succeeded. So we got to organize, organize, organize. Voter suppression frustrates voter turnout, but it can also motivate voter turnout. It can
We're
cause
ready.
people to rise up in us and say, pardon the preacher, hell no, you're not going to stop us from voting.
We are so ready. Don't even worry. We are ready and prepared. We are not afraid. Trust. Yeah. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You have been heard.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good to meet you. Thanks, Jeff.
So nice to meet you.
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you so much. I know you've got a busy day and a busy week ahead. Again, just want to thank you so much for spending some time with Georgia Equality Staff Board and the folks watching on Facebook. Any last words for us in this Pride Month?
Happy Pride Month to everybody. And look, it's my honor to be here with all of you today. And I'll see you around somewhere in a neighborhood near you. Keep it safe.
Thank you.
Same to you, Senator. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything you're doing every single day. Georgia is better and the country is better having you in DC.